Hi, and welcome to A Class of Their Own podcast, revealing the human stories behind their name. We will hear honest and intimate reflections from our guests who, despite their circumstances, shape a world that reflects their unique visions of success. Join me, Mira Magacha, to learn from these inspirational people and take the first step to make your own change. On today's episode, we're joined by Mark Pettican. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very, very well. Great to be here. Really good to be here. Lovely place.
If we dive straight in, who is Mark?
Who am I? Well, I would say I'm a working class man who's, pretty much. I'm a father. I'm a husband. And all the other roles. I've always tried to be different if I can. So to do things in a slightly different way and to think of things and I've always tried to be very conscious. I'm a very conscious person. I think about how I behave, how I act. So I try and put everything into a real-time, situation. I've always been a bit like that. Quite creative, quite entrepreneurial in mindset, not necessarily action. I'll clarify that there. But yeah, I've got quite an association with lots of very sort of creative, arty things. So that's how. If you were to ask my wife, that's exactly what she'd say.
You started with a working class man. Is that where you would naturally, outside of the studio that we're sat in today, would you naturally say that?
I think I would, because I've always very much thought about myself as, you go out to work to provide to do this, and that involves doing work, and that involves activity, and I've always sort of, I think my upbringing and the way I grew up, I was surrounded by that, and it was very much about, you were defined by what you did, Then that person was, he's the guy with the cars, he's the guy with the plumber, he's the electrician. He was that was so I've always had that mindset, I think, ever since I was probably an early teenager, when all of a sudden, things started to sort of look very different. And I still do it today. I still use that benchmark of working class very much as when people say, I've worked in some big corporate organisations, people say, it's been a really, really tough day. It's been really, really hard. My benchmark is, it's not mining, is it? It's not, working on a building site. It's not working in the docks for 12 hours. And I've always had that sort of mindset in the way I think.
Let's take you back. Where did Mark grow up? Where did it all start?
Yeah, so I grew up on a council estate. And my quite a nice one, in that it was very, as I said before, it was one of the new towns, and lots of things had been built to accommodate working class parents. My mum didn't work, she was a housewife, and that's what she did, and she was very happy with that. My dad, blue collar worker, he was a car mechanic. And he, every morning went out at 7 o'clock in the morning and got back at 7 o'clock at night. And then at weekends, he did private work to top up his income. So, I had a very comfortable childhood, in the grand scheme of things. Some of the strongest memories I have of it were, always being fed, always being warm. But when it came to things like birthdays, Christmas, holidays, things like that, it wasn't really something which my family indulged in, because they couldn't afford it. And it was very much, but again, did it affect me? I don't think so. But it certainly made you appreciate the things in life a little bit more, I think, to be fair.
And do you have siblings?
No, only child.
Okay. And so growing up in the circumstances with mum being at home, dad being out most of the time, including weekends.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? Was there any difference of what you saw around you compared to what you had at home?
It felt very normal to me. I didn't know anything different. I think the one thing that hit me was some friends whose both parents worked. And I always had this wonderful thing. I finished school, I went home because my mum would be there. And what I started to notice was the amount of my friends that would come home with me because their parents weren't there. And I remember thinking when I was younger about, I'm not sure how I feel about that, you know, not them coming to my house, but the fact that they didn't have someone at home.
Right.
My mum was very sort of, she came from the East End. She was very sort of that sort of very maternal type person. And you know, my friends, they would always come to my house because my mum was there, and she was always, you know, doing various things, cooking and various other things. So but I've got I've certainly got no bad experience of it, but there was a few confusing points where I was like, why isn't everyone else like this? You know, why have they got it different? But then, as I got older, you start to realise that they're the ones that went on holiday a couple of times a year. They're the ones with the brand new car. They're the ones who went on the school trips. Because, you know, and then all of a sudden, as you get older, you start to realise it's, okay, there's pros and cons with these situations. But did it affect me or hurt me in any way? Probably not, if I'm honest.
You talk about growing up and seeing more or seeing a difference. What started happening for you when you got older and became more aware of your circumstances or situations?
Well, one of the interesting things my dad said to me, I remember going into a local DIY shop, and a man pulled up in a Rolls Royce, and he parked the Rolls Royce, and he came into the DIY shop, and he asked for something, and the owner gave it to him, and he told him the price, and the guy argued, said, well, that's too expensive. What? I'm not paying that. And I remember watching that and observing that, and the man left, and he got in this Rolls Royce, and I said to my dad, I said, Dad, why, if he can afford a Rolls Royce, is he arguing about the price of something quite small? And my dad said to me, because he can. And that was a real light bulb that went off in my head about, right, so yeah, it's not just about what you own. It's not just about it's about the mindset that you carry into these things that can then dictate various other things. And that was a real thing. I was about 14 at the time when that happened. I was like, interesting. And then I became a lot more aware, and when it came to jobs and leaving school and doing various things like that, I knew I had to go and earn money. Right. I knew I had to do that. Number of reasons. One, my parents couldn't afford to support me in any higher education. It wasn't even an option, to be honest, when I left school. You had a couple of choices where I was. You went to work on a building site or in the building game up in London, or you went to work for a bank. That was pretty much the way it was laid out, you know, for me. I loved history, and I thought, what can I do with history? But the options for history were very limited. There's not many career choices with it.
And who laid out these choices in terms of go work on a building site or go to a bank? Where does that stem from?
Well, it was a combination of things. It was the school's attitude was, we're in an area that's very close to London. There's lots of big financial institutions. You know, they're great organisations. It's a job for life at that time. Why not? You should do this. Okay. You know, you're impressionable 16. No, that's a good idea. So that's what you do. And the building site thing was less school, but more people that, you know, were around in the circle of influence of my family, people my dad knew, that type of thing. And that was a common thing. You knew someone who did this. Your dad had a chat with them, and yeah, you can start Monday. You know, it was that type of environment. And I tried it. I did try it for a couple of weeks. About a month, I think it was. And it's very rewarding in that it's one of those jobs where you start with an empty canvas and you finish with, we did that, great. but getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to travel, sitting in the back of a van, and what I became very aware of is that the people, and I hope this doesn't sound snobbish, but the people that I was working with, I was thinking, no, I want a bit more than that. The conversation, the way that the opinions of certain things, and I thought, no, there's more to it than that, and I want more than that. So I knew that wasn't really probably where I was at.
What age were you at this point?
I was 16 at that point.
Okay.
So, and I'd applied for some of the banks, and as we were told to do, and one of them came through, and I thought, well, why not? And again, the feedback then from the parents was very much, oh, you're going to work. My son works for a bank. Oh, yeah, my son works for a bank.
So the prestige of it.
Yeah, the prestige of it was a big thing. And I remember every single time an advert for the bank came on the television, my parents would almost stand up and salute because it was just their thing. And, and it made you feel, I'm doing, they're your benchmarks at that point. So, but it was probably one of the best decisions I made because it did give me an awful lot of that opinion, professionalism that I was clearly looking for in my next steps. So,
what happens next?
Well, after the induction and various other things in the bank, they used to literally push you off into different directions, and I was put into the debt collection area.
Working class man, debt collection.
Debt collection, I suppose there is, it started at the bottom where you were very much doing the administrative jobs and roles, and then gradually I started to ask a lot of questions and to understand why is this and where does that go and how's that going to work and where can I make this better and how. Quickly got promoted. And then I found myself after 3 or 4 years, I was asked to manage people. I was like 19 years old, 20 years old. My manager gone on holiday, I was asked would I deputise. And at that age I was like managing a group of like 12 people. And I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
And it came very natural to me. And they might have disagreed, to be honest.
But for you thought you were doing a great job.
But it seemed to be working. They were responding to me, and it seemed to be working. And it must have because as soon as that opportunity came up for promotion, I was promoted to that leadership role at the age of like 20 years old, I think it was. Which was pretty unheard of in the bank back then. But we worked in a very dynamic area of the bank, and it was the norm. That was okay. And from then on, I became quite good at what we were doing. And then I got the call from the training and development group because I'd done a lot of training and induction with new people. And they said, "Oh yeah, would you like to work like in the official training and development division?" I was like, yeah, I think that would be good. And that's what I then did next, and then went into that world, which was the basis of what then, was the springboard into the wider HR world that I'm in now.
And why do you think you were successful? So what is it that comes from the younger years that took you and made you or helped you be more successful?
I think some very early feedback and coaching. I think some of that feedback that you get in your early years, if you listen to it, it can serve you tenfold in your career. One of the things that I come, as I say, from Essex, home counties, estuary accent. It might surprise you to know that I've actually worked on it over the years, but I was very much like that. I was very much, how you doing? You all right? Nice to see you. Great. That was how I used to speak. And then working in the bank and we had a day where we had some big senior executives come down for to understand what we were doing, and I entertained them. I called one of them mate, and secondly I spoke in my normal dialogue and style. And my boss called me to one side afterwards and said, do you realise you just called an executive of Lloyd's Bank mate? And I went, okay. She went, don't do that. And I said, okay. He didn't make any comment himself, and he seemed through his actions and his behaviour not to be particularly worried about it. But and then the other thing she said, in your accent, in your voice, it really did come out, and so think about that. And I remember she said that, think about that. Not, I want you to talk differently. Think about that. And I said, okay.
And you thought about that, and what did you do?
I thought about it, and I'd always been interested in the voice anyway. I was one of those individuals when I was younger. I used to do impressions and different voices and different accents, and I was fascinated by the different combinations and how it worked. So I thought, right. So I started to sort of be very conscious about it and to understand the construct of my voice a bit more. Not to change it, but very much to become adaptable. Because, if I walked into, a group of my friends and went, hello, how are you? It's fantastic to see you. How the devil have you been? Right, they're not going to respond favourably, are they? Whereas if I walked into, like, the House of Commons, for example, and said, hello, good to see you, it would be perfectly reasonable and normal.
Would it be authentic to who you are?
No. But I think, I'm using it as very much some extreme examples there.
Yeah.
But it's the subtleties. But in order to get a grip on the subtleties, you just have to consciously think. So no. But I realised very early on that there's pros and cons to being from where I'm from and the way I sound. And I thought, if you want to do something about that, Mark, you need to do something about that. So that's why I chose to do it.
Someone quite senior came over to you and gave you some feedback. Mm-hmm. You could have taken that in a completely wrong way and said, I'm not doing that,
yep,
and carried on. Do you think that outcome would have been as successful for you? Because to your own admission, she didn't say, change it. She said, think about it.
I think at that time, if I'd have said, sorry, that's the way I am, that's the way I'm going to be, I would have still maintained a job, a role, and a function. It would have been fine. But I think I would have had to work so much harder in order to get to the next rung or to the next level or to gain exposure to other things, because these things stick. So I think I'm not necessarily sure it would have changed, but I think the direction. I ended up leaving the bank for a number of reasons. That wasn't necessarily one of them, but one of the thoughts of leaving the bank was, I have a style, I have a way, I have a preference, and none of those align to where the bank wants me to be. And I thought, well, you can live with that, Mark, and just stay where you are, or you can actually go out and try and find somewhere that's a little bit more aligned to you as a human being. And that's what I did.
And is that really important to you in terms of aligning with what is important to Mark, in terms of what you do, how you live your life, where you work, the way you carry yourself, all of those things?
I think, yeah, I mean, when you're younger, right, it's a case of, you're a lot more naive about some of these things. And I think now, and we've always got the pressure of the mortgage and paying the bills, and, it's always interesting to me when you see various things about people saying, oh, you've got to live your life, you've got to go for what you believe in, you've got to do it. Everyone that says that hasn't got a mortgage or kids, right? It's one of those things. And I think, so you've got to be realistic, but I mean, certainly now, having worked for the small companies, the medium-sized companies, the big companies, the mega big companies, it makes you realise, actually, is it worth it? Because you go through a huge amount of pain and anguish. And you know what? Yes, you're paying the mortgage. Yes, you've got some money in your back pocket. But up here, is scrambled, and you get it's yeah. I've learned an awful lot, certainly in the last 10 years, about who I am and what makes the difference for me.
And so what journey have you been on over the last 10 years, and what triggered that moment where you started going on this journey, or reflecting back and going, actually, it's been the last 10 years where it's different?
I worked for a number of sort of medium-sized companies, and was HR director and had that ability to influence and work with the leadership team and various other things. Thoroughly enjoyed it. However, when you work for those companies, there's limitations on what you can achieve and what you can do, and there's earning limitations as well. So it's like, right, let's go into the bigger environment. And I did that. And it was very different. It was very different. Your influence is a lot less. You've got a bigger job title. You're earning more money. You're earning whatever, but you can't do anything because it has to go through various things. But you find a way, and you adapt, and you find a way to do that. And then, I worked for an organisation that had 40,000 people worldwide, and I thought, well, this is a big organisation. And then I went to work for an organisation that had 110,000 people, and you realise the relativity of it. And whilst it's good because of the prestige and all of the background stuff and everything else, your ability to actually make a difference, your ability to use your abilities, it's just drastically reduced. And all of a sudden, the number one things that are influencing and making your life difficult and challenging are things that you never see on a capability or a competency list. You'll never see them. No. Political, manoeuvring, for example. You'll never see that on a list of top 10 leader traits, and yet it's one of the most important in some of these bigger organisations. And self-PR. Again, self-PR and personal brand is a much bigger thing than it's ever been because of social media and various other things. But again, you wouldn't necessarily see it on the list of top 10 things you need to focus on. But it's absolutely critical, because if you don't do it, you'll never get where you need to be. And I think, those observations are, it's really sort of tuned my mind in very much as to what's important, because you use an awful lot of energy trying to trying to stand still.
Money Supermarket Group are proud sponsors of A Class of Their Own podcast. Their portfolio includes well-known brands such as Money Saving Expert, Quidco, offering great cashback deals, and the renowned Money Supermarket, a leading price comparison website. Championing an inclusive environment where every voice is valued, they are dedicated to leading positive change. They collaborate with schools to promote diversity, educate on equity, and partner with charities to address key reasons for financial fear today. To learn more and help your household save money, click the links in the show notes below. Thinking about what success was for you growing up and the journey you've been on, how has that definition of success changed over the years for you?
My definition of success when I was younger may make you laugh. It was successful people had two things. One, their own solicitor.
Their own solicitor?
Yeah, because if you were successful,
right,
you needed your own solicitor.
Okay, I'm going to ask why in a minute, but go on, carry on.
And the second one, and this is bizarre, successful people have a sit-on lawnmower.
A sit-on lawnmower?
That was like two of the little flags. I thought, well, if you've got your own solicitor and you must, if you've got a sit-on mower, you must have a big house, right? If you've got a solicitor, then you must be dealing with stuff that's really important and big and stuff like that.
I love that.
So they were very much, so I must admit, the first time I had a solicitor in my phone on speed dial, it was an element, I'd grown up a lot by then, but it was one of those things of, oh, okay.
I've made it.
Yeah, and then I bought a sit-on lawnmower. It was a second-hand one, and it didn't work, and it needed a lot of work on it, but I had a sit-on lawn, and was totally over the top for what I had. But in my little way, it was like, yes, I've achieved it. So yeah, there's funny little things that, and there was another thing as well that when I was growing up, there was a guy that lived near us, and he had his own company. and he always looked really, really smart. He always looked really good. He was a nice guy as well. He was polite, he was courteous. And he drove this wonderful car. And it used to stand out where I lived, this car. It was just fantastic. So I always had that association as well of like, if you can afford a car like that, then you've been successful. I've realised, obviously, that some of those things are, hey, they come with a badge as well that is not always a good thing. But on the other hand, they were the sorts of things when I was growing up, or what success was about.
And what about now?
Now it's about health. You know, it's really critical, and mental health. I've suffered a lot over you know, where, with hindsight, if I'm honest, I've been through a couple of things where really traumatic things from a job perspective, pressure, and various ways I've been treated, where I've not known what to do. There was that first one was about 15 years ago, and I learned a huge amount from that.
Do you want to share a bit more about that?
I can. I was basically I was leading big HR team. I was a general manager, HR, facilities, and IT, and we were progressing, expanding. It was great team ethic, team ethos, everything. And we're doing a huge office move. We were consolidating 2 offices into 1. Huge money, huge risk as well. My team led it. We drove it. We did it absolutely perfectly. We did it on budget. We did it on time. We didn't affect any customers. And it gave us this new facility and premise that was going to really springboard us into the future. The thing that really, really hurt was, rather than be congratulated for a job well done, I was then accused of not following procedures, not following financial etiquette, et cetera, et cetera. And I was accused at one point of fraud, in that the only way you could have achieved this is if you've done something that you shouldn't have done. And after the euphoria of getting this achieved, to then be accused of that, because I've got a strong leadership ethic, I've always led teams with, you know, strong morals and values, and they respond to that. And I'm a practical individual. And we had done things, but they weren't illegal. There were things like, you know, we need a new generator. That's going to cost £60,000. Let's not spend that now. Let's extend the warranty on that one, and then in next year's budget, we'll buy a new one. So but I was accused that, oh, you've hidden that cost. I said, no, I haven't. I've deferred that cost to next year. Yeah, but you should have declared it. And it was all that sort of thing. Ended up getting under full investigation. And it was remarkably traumatic because of the euphoria of achieving, and then to be accused of that. I had my team in pieces because they were being investigated, and I had people asking for X. Anyway, 3 weeks after this had all happened, I got a phone call from the lead investigator, basically saying, congratulations, we found nothing wrong. Your whole process and what you did was totally exemplary, and apologies that you've had to go through this. But the damage was done.
Yeah, the trust was lost.
The trust was gone. And very soon after that, my boss then was, you know, left. Someone new came in. He didn't like HR. He thought HR had too much power. He didn't like it. And as a consequence, you know, we didn't get on, and then he decided to make an example of me by just basically not kicking me out of the business, because obviously there were some legal bits and pieces, but he could have done it differently, and he didn't. He chose not to. So that I ended up, if I'm honest, with hindsight, I ended up with depression after that. Didn't realise it at the time.
Not surprising.
And I thought I was just having a low period, but I kept kicking myself and saying, come on, Mark, you've done nothing wrong here. And it took me a long while, and I invested an awful lot of energy in this is unfair. And I learned from that. It took me a long while, but I then landed the job, one of the nicest, best jobs I've ever had. So, it came with a positive, but yeah, with hindsight, yeah.
But it comes with challenges at the time, and you have to get through that process and that journey to come out the other side and see that. Absolutely.
But it was one of the lowest points in my life. It was an awful period, magnified by the fact that it was born out of a huge success and one of the most successful parts of my career. It was a strange phenomena at the time. It really was. But yeah.
From a working point of view, you've had what people would describe as success. Mm-hmm. You've had the big ticket jobs, you've had the money, all of those things. And so when we think about those big jobs and some of the privilege that comes with that, how does that disconnect with who you are and your upbringing, and when and how does that show up?
Yeah, it is interesting when you start thinking about these things. I remember I worked for an organisation where the whole of the leadership team had to fly to Australia because we had operations there, and that was the big place to go. And we went, luckily, on business class, which is very nice. It's a long flight, and when you do that, it's always good. And there were three of us that went at that particular point at the same time. And when we landed in Sydney, there were cars to pick us up as part of the flight and the deal. And I thought someone would have thought, well, there's three people going to the same hotel from the same company. We need one car. No. When we got to the airport, we walked outside and there was three black Mercedes waiting to pick each one of us up. And I was like, that's just a waste. And I was with the one of the other senior execs, and I said, oh, come on, we don't need three cars. Why don't we all jump in one car, and then the other two drivers can take some time off, and then if we organise it, then he can then, on the way back, he can have the time off, and then and they looked at me as if I was mad. And they said, why would we do that? And I said, because it's not practical. I said, and it's not, I mean, these are working people. They give them some time back. We don't need three cars. And they went, we've paid for them. And I went, wow. I said, and begrudgingly, they went off and got in each of their cars, and I was left on my own. I said, wow. And like things like that, I thought that's just wrong. That is, one, it's not respecting the company's money. Yeah. Two, we're not respecting the individuals who've had to get up very early to come. At the end of it, yes, we're paying for it, but these are human beings. Come on, we could make life. So that would be an example.
Also, the sustainability side of it, the practicalities of it. If you're going to different places, oh my God, fine, but you were all going to the same place, yeah. That blows my mind. Yeah, and there's a couple of other things when we were out and about, and I've always struggled with that, with the whole, you're travelling, and therefore, yes, the company needs to reimburse you for various things, and I've seen, a few things where, it's like, really, do we have to do that? That's going to cost a huge amount of money, and that never sits well with me, and so things like that, I've never felt comfortable with. I've at the end of the day, the organisation is employing you to do a job, and it should expense you reasonably. That's of course, but no. Ultimately, it's coming out of the company's monies, which then means these people that are working back here might have to work harder. Yeah. That doesn't sit well with me, and it's never sat well with me at all. And I think that's again one of the things. The principle, the walk the talk principle, is that if an organisation is saying, right, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this, right, we'll do it then. And then when you see some of the, and I've used, it's not just senior leaders, it's all employees doing other things and not having actually think, well, you've just said you're going to do that, and now you're doing that, and it happens a lot in organisations, and that just doesn't sit well
with me. I'm a great believer, and it's tough. You know, I grew up training leaders, managers as part of the training and development background, the learning and the HR background, coaching leaders, mentoring leaders, doing that. If you're saying this stuff in a training room and saying, these are the principles, this is what you need to do, I need to show that. Yeah. I need to demonstrate that. I've always believed, and it's tough, really, really hard, but that's the best way of really amplifying these messages. And I think that other leaders should do similar, and some they don't. So that's a real frustration for me.
We've talked a lot about Mark at work and the professional Mark. What about Mark at home now?
I'm an amateur builder. Funny that. I love. It's therapy to me. So I love making things, building things. I've done some huge projects in our house. I've done projects help people with other things. I have every power tool known to man. I love that type of stuff. I love working with cars and engineering. I like simple engineering, and I guess I like cars. I like motorbikes and that sort of stuff. And it's how cliche, but it's true. But I actually like it from not just I like the engineering, and I like health, even down to things like, back to it, lawnmowers. Not necessarily sit on ones, but again, I just like the simple engineering and things like that of things, and I like to understand them and make them the best that they can be. So, yeah, and I don't have kids anymore. I have adults. So
I was going to say, what happened to them? What did you do to the children?
I know.
They disappeared, did they?
No, they're still around.
No, they're just adult children.
No, I've got adults now. So obviously that's not the same. But I mean, they still live at home, and say we've. And my wife and I like to travel and to do it when we can, and we do a bit of that. So again, I've got too many hobbies. I am one of those. I have too many hobbies. I have too many things I really enjoy doing. So disciplining myself to focus on one or two is something I'm constantly trying to do. So,
what advice would you give anyone who comes from a similar background to you?
The biggest piece of advice I would give is listen to the people around you. Be careful who you select as a role model. It's very easy to find a role model that you think, I want to be like that. It's very easy to do. But is it the right thing to do? And I think that's an important thing. I've seen an awful lot of young people find the wrong role model. And again, it's difficult now with social media and various other things. It's in your face all the time. But find a good role model. If you're given advice or feedback, there's a natural tendency now to go, no, and just turn away. Because we're shielding ourselves. We don't want to be hurt. So therefore, I'm just going to blank that off. Yeah. Feedback is feedback. It's what you choose to do with it. And that's one of the things I learned very early on. So if people are giving you feedback, listen, understand. If you choose not to do anything with it, that's fine. But listen. Make sure it goes in first, because there might be a gem in there. And it won't always come to us like it does on the television or in the films with that eureka moment of, I now know the answer. It doesn't work like that. No, it does sometimes, but it doesn't generally work like that. Yeah. So listen, find, search, and be conscious about yourself as well. It never ceases to amaze me, where people behave in this way. And I just want to think to myself, are you aware of what you're saying and what you're doing? Because there's almost like a disconnect. And I think, get conscious with yourself, because you know what? It's quite an eventful playing field in there, and you never know. You might find something that you didn't know you had. So that would be my advice. What's
the one thing you hide from the world that you don't want them to know about you?
Other than the criminal convictions?
Yeah.
That was a joke. That's a cracking question.
I have a few.
Oh, good. I'm really struggling with it because I think I'm fairly open about most things. I probably the one, I'll give you an example of one thing recently where, and it's a small thing, but it's I've always maintained I'm very good at heights. I'm okay at heights. It's stability at heights I'm not very good at. So if I'm up tall in a building, no problem. If I'm up on a ladder high, as long as it's stable, I'm okay. But when it starts to wobble, that's when I'm not good. And I must admit, it was in New York last year, and we were on one of the buildings with the big glass thing that goes out. Couldn't do it. I just could not physically put a foot on this glass thing out on the thing. I hated myself for it. It went against everything in my mind, because that's, think about it, be conscious. It's not going to cause you any harm. I couldn't do it. And yeah, rather than admit that, I sort of, it's a bit windy over there, I'm going to go over there now and stuff. So the thing that people don't, is that I do have things like that where I generally sort of, I still see them as weaknesses, so therefore I wouldn't necessarily share them. And there's a few things like that where I'm okay with spiders and snakes and all that great stuff, but I do get scared by things. And
that's something you don't really want people to know.
No, because the thing, I get scared by things, and I certainly in recent years as well, I'm not frightened to cry now, but I was, because I just don't do stuff like that. But I'm not frightened to cry now, to the extent now that watching Escape to the Country, and they come up with some what's it thing, and I'm sitting and but again, it's one of those things that don't be frightened to let it out, because it's there for a reason. So, and I've learned that. Sharing
your emotions and feeling your emotions.
Yeah, because I'm an independent guy, and I was brought up with independence is critical. If you can stand on your own 2 feet, then disappointment will be less. This will be less. You'll be able to do more. You'll be able to and I generally still believe that's true for me anyway. But it then means that involving others isn't always your natural preference, and I find that hard. I can do it, and I do it, but I find it really hard because it's just not me. So yeah, you've opened me up there.
And so we started this conversation with who is Mark? And I'd like to go back to that question, having had a little bit of a journey. So to close, who is Mark?
Well, do you mean personally? Yeah, I mean personally, I like to think I'm a considerate, value-based individual that's got a kind heart, that does his best, would never on purpose harm anybody, or would always try and support people. And I'm very much, I like to think I'm amusing. Debatable. But I'm a great believer. If you can make people laugh, you can make people listen. If you can make people listen, you can make them understand. I've always believed that. And that's very much that's the way I like to be, because I think it's extremely powerful. And that's me. That's me, really. I think, if you ask my kids or you ask my wife or my friends, they'd probably agree with that. I try and be that, if I can.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that conversation, then please share A Class of Their Own podcast with your friends and family, and keep spreading the word to those that haven't discovered us yet. It makes a huge impact on our ability to have the people you want. Keep being you through connection, learning, and play. You are a class of your own.